Join us for a monumental event under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Ministers, policymakers, industry leaders, and changemakers from 57 member countries and many partner organizations will converge to better shape the future of sustainable development. From 27th to 30th of April 2024, Riyadh will be the epicenter of global dialogue and collaboration. Join us as we continue this collective journey of collaboration, inspiration, and transformation. 2024 IsDB Group Annual Meetings and Golden Jubilee, celebrating 50 years of impact, innovation, and partnership. Cherishing our past, charting our future. Welcome to the heart of innovation, where the sand dunes of time meet the waves of progress. Welcome to Riyadh, the pulsating capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In the cradle of civilization, where dreams soar higher than the desert dunes, a beacon of hope rises. For 5 decades, the IsDB has been a catalyst for change, empowering nations and transforming lives. As we celebrate half a century of resilience, determination, and progress, join us for a monumental event under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Ministers, policymakers, industry leaders, and changemakers from 57 member countries and many partner organizations will converge to better shape the future of sustainable development. From 27th to 30th of April 2024, Riyadh will be the epicenter of global dialogue and collaboration. Join us as we continue this collective journey of collaboration, inspiration, and transformation. 2024 IsDB Group Annual Meetings and Golden Jubilee, celebrating 50 years of impact, innovation, and partnership. Cherishing our past, charting our future. Welcome to the heart of innovation, where the sand dunes of time meet the waves of progress. Welcome to Riyadh, the pulsating capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In the cradle of civilization, where dreams soar higher than the desert dunes, a beacon of hope rises. For 5 decades, the IsDB
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished panelists, honored guests, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of the Islamic Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank Institute, the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development, I would like to welcome you all to the first side event of the 2024 IsDB annual meetings. The theme for the side event is Pathway to Prosperity, Multidimensional Poverty in IsDB member countries. My name is Arif Suleiman. I am the IsDB Group Chief Economist, and I will be your moderator for today's session. It is an absolute pleasure for me to be here today in this wonderful city of Riyadh, a city that has witnessed remarkable growth over the past few years and serves as a beacon of the pace of development that is possible. As we celebrate the Golden Jubilee and 50 years in the service of humanity, it is heartwarming to see colleagues that have been in the bank since inception, and our executive director that has been here, one of, stalwart that started the bank, mashallah, tabarakallah. Thank you all for joining us today. Really, we have a lot of history in the room and personalities that were here 50 years back that started the bank, and now, alhamdulillah, seeing this initiative come to fruition. So thank you all for joining us this morning. As we celebrate the Golden Jubilee and 50 years in the service of humanity, it is appropriate that we look back at the fight on poverty, something that has been at the heart of the IsDB's mission since its inception. We gather here today at a critical juncture. Despite decades of progress, extreme poverty remains a stubborn challenge. The COVID-19 pandemic and the recent global shocks have set us back and reversed years of gains. Across the world, the total number of people living in extreme monetary poverty has increased by 7% from 2019 to 2022, and currently we have about 250 million people, or 40% of the world's extremely poor people in monetary terms living in ISDB member countries. Over 460 million, that's 1 in 3, living in multidimensional poverty in 42 of our member countries. In some countries, some instances, over 90% living in multidimensional poverty. However, today is not about lamenting about the challenge and the state of poverty in our member countries, but rather exploring pathways to prosperity. Looking ahead to see how we can change the narrative and move from poverty to prosperity. We have seen several of our member countries make significant progress, and countries such as Turkmenistan, Albania, Morocco, and Gabon have half the proportion of people living in multidimensional poverty in the space of 10 years. We are honored today to host a panel of global leaders from academia and international organizations who will share their knowledge and experience in the critical area of analysis and policy design for addressing multidimensional poverty. Let me quickly introduce the speakers, and I'm going to try and make sure I get all the pronunciations correct this time around. So Sabina Alkai, on my immediate left, is the director at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, and is also professor of development studies at Oxford. Sabina is one of the architects behind the MPI, along with James Foster. Alongside her, we have Abdullah Al-Dardari, who is the UN Assistant Administrator and Director of the UNDP Regional Bureau for Arab States. Abdullah has served in several positions across the UN system and other international organizations, and has rich field experience in promoting human development in very challenging contexts. We then also have Ignacio I'm going to go to Ignacio Hughes. Ignacio is a seasoned development practitioner with extensive MDB experience at the Inter-American Development Bank and now at the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, known as CAF. He heads up resource mobility and global alliances, and is also responsible for Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Maria Gonzalo. Pilar Gonzalo is the Director of Development Cooperation at the OECD. Pilar previously served as Deputy Minister and Minister of Planning and Economic Policy in Costa Rica. Wealth of experience on the practical side, and also now from the MDBs. Last but not least, a good friend, dear colleague, Sami Al-Suelem, who is a renowned scholar in the field of Islamic economics and Islamic finance. And Sami has a long experience in applied research and capacity development. He sits on several boards, including that of the IFSB, the Islamic Financial Services Board, and the Islamic Fiqh Academy. Just to ensure that we're all on the same page, Sabina, in terms of MPI, the term of MPI is bandied about quite a lot these days. We have different kinds of MPI. Help us understand in lay terms what an MPI is, what is the difference between the global and national MPI, and then just while elaborating on it, it would be good to understand why we need the different measures and what each does in ISDB member countries. So Sabina, in a few minutes, help us understand all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm very grateful for the possibility of discussing poverty in the first session of the Islamic Development Bank. The kind of commitment that signals is very important to us because there is so much poverty. So a multidimensional poverty index complements monetary poverty, which has long been measured, by looking at the different deprivations that strike the same person at the same time. For example, is somebody in your household undernourished? Is a child out of school? Does nobody in the household have schooling of 6 years or more? Do you have clean water, adequate sanitation, electricity, cooking fuel, good housing materials, and a basic set of assets? These, for example, are the indicators of the global MPI that UNDP and OFI have released annually since 2010. This Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI, is used to compare across countries, and it covers 42 member countries of the Islamic Development Bank. 1.6 billion people live in those 42 countries, and as Arif said, 28% are poor. But across member countries, poverty ranges from very, very small in places like Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, to over 90% in the country of Niger, very high in Burkina Faso, for example, or in Mali. And in the very low poverty countries, but also in the high ones, there's a need for a policy tool that has national ownership, that's tailored to the national development plan and the priorities of that country, that maybe has employment and insecurity in the case of Afghanistan, that maybe has obesity, not undernutrition or also undernutrition in the case of Maldives, that also has internet access in Bangladesh. So in member countries, they also develop official national multidimensional poverty indices that are tailored to their contexts and their data sets. These cannot be compared, but can be used by governments as policy tools. So for example, the national MPI is an official indicator of the Sustainable Development Goals. And around 12 member countries report this, and 13 are in the process of making it. And in some places, there are measures that are in the pilot stage, for example, in Uzbekistan. And so with the global MPI, you can compare across countries in 3 dimensions and 10 indicators. In the national multidimensional poverty indices, they are used for policy. How? First of all, to look at trends over time and see how poverty has gone down. But second, to accelerate that by allocating budgetary resources nationally, subnationally, and by sectors to look at the deprivations poor people are experiencing and put the investment there so it has the biggest impact on poverty. That's so important in this time of fiscal tightness. Another use is to target the poorest of the poor at the household level or geographically. For example, the poorest regions will have much, much higher poverty than other regions, and so they might need to be targeted. But many countries are targeting at the household level multidimensionally poor people, so they know what services they need, what children need scholarship, what people lack access to health care, where there is a need for electricity, and that can be tackled. And so the value of the MPI is, one, to give an overview of the 464 million people who are in poverty and how this has changed over time, and nationally, the changes, the reductions, so that can be celebrated. But then also to give policymakers prospectively the tools they need to track change, to accelerate reduction, and to make small changes that will really impact lives. The aim is not to measure poverty. The aim is to reduce the suffering and the difficulties, the disadvantages in so many poor people's lives. And that's why I'm so grateful for this first session.
So Sabina, thank you very much for that. In a nutshell, the global MPI for cross-country comparisons, the national MPI to guide decision-making. Now, the MPI has gained traction globally, and today it's widely used as, in 100 countries, and with approximately 40 countries having the national MPI. UNDP continues to play a crucial role in promoting the understanding and tackling of multidimensional poverty. Abdullah, the question that comes to mind is we have the Human Development Index, and we also now have this MPI. How does the MPI, HDI, differ in their measures of poverty and development? Are there any complementarities in the information, and are there any interrelationships? So let me bring you in at this point, Abdullah.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. I think policymakers and people working in public policy who have been observing the progress from a GDP-limited economic indexing to the HDI, which was a great addition to the way we thought about policy making, to the way we thought about income distribution and investment budgets of the state, and also for borrowing. What do you borrow for? And how do you pay back those loans? All of this HDI was an extremely useful tool to expand and widen the horizon on how decision makers look at macroeconomic policy and how do they spend the money and where. However, and by the way, the HDI accompanied all of us working in public policy when we were working on the Millennium Development Goals. We had a very good tool that could be linked to the MDG progress and achievement. So that was a considerable, I think it was a paradigm shift in our thinking about economics in general and what do they mean from the human aspect and how do they relate to the daily livelihoods of people. But then when we started facing further challenges, which are inequality, unease among societies and within societies leading to fragility and to conflict, and also good indicators on macroeconomics, but at the same time the society is feeling unsettled. And decision makers, and for some moment I was one of them, it was difficult to say, what's the reason? How come we have a good GDP growth, and in fact we have a good HDI, and still there is fragility in the society, and there is unease, and there are tensions? MPI came to tell us what's happening in this body that's called the national economy. How do people feel, because what type of things they are deprived of in their daily lives? What affects their children? What affects the promise of their futures at the individual level? And that's a huge paradigm shift in the way we think about our economic policy. Let me say that also MPI has accompanied the Sustainable Development Goals, and therefore with these 17 goals, applying the MPI to them will give us a very strong tool of actually breaking it down to the individual level, to the sub-regional level, to the sub-national level, and to the national level, and trying to understand the differences and the fragilities and the weaknesses. If you do a correlation between fragility in the world and MPI, you will find a much higher correlation than the average MPI position and ranking in countries without fragility. So I think from our point of view, working in UNDP and trying to help countries in fragility specifically, it's very important that we do understand the MPI very well. We actually are doing the MPI in 26 of the 57 IsDB member countries, working closely with OFI most of the time. I'd like to close this session by saying neoclassical economics as we know them have reached their limits. And therefore we need to think about another paradigm shift that brings together new types of circular, green, sustainable, inclusive economics with an advancing of the MPI, and I know OFI is working on that, and we are happy to be partnering with them in this, and to take humanity one step further in understanding the relationships between economics, human welfare, wealth distribution, and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Abdullah. I think that puts it quite nicely and helps us better understand the linkages between the HDI and MPI. Now, on the Islamic concept of development, we have Maqasid al-Sharia. So, Sami, is this at all related to now the MPI and HDI? Are there any interrelationships there? How do we place this whole concept of Maqasid al-Sharia within the HDI MPI discussion?
Thank you, Brother Arif, and thanks to the distinguished panelists. The multi-dimension, by the way, I hate abbreviations, so I will decrypt all these MDP, HDI, WXYZ, so I'll make it longer, so I'll take a little longer. So, multi-dimensional poverty index is a very appealing concept and paradigm, and we are very proud to be working together with Oxford University and across the IsDB group in developing this. from an Islamic point of view, this concept shows very clearly how the principles of Islamic economics are actually universal. Poverty has no religion. When Prophet Muhammad ﷺ started his mission in Mecca, the majority of people obviously were non-Muslims. And yet, from day one, the Prophet emphasized the rights of the poor, of the orphaned, of the needy, even of prisoners of war. Imagine the war is taking place between two factions, none of them are Muslims, and yet the prisoners of war, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. So these are universal humanitarian values, and we are very proud to be working on these things. Now, I would pick on the point my colleague, Mr. Abdullah, mentioned about the new classical economics. Harvard University professor Michael Sander wrote a book several years back. I'm quite old, so for me, 10 years is quite close. So, what money cannot buy. This is a very important thing. If we measure poverty only using money, we are assuming that money can solve almost all problems or all forms of poverty. But that's not true. Money cannot buy everything. If you go through the studies of happiness and income, in the beginning, of course, the person, when he started his career, then higher income will correspond with higher happiness, up to a point. Beyond that point, higher income will not bring in higher happiness. Happiness will become flat, even though income is increasing. And we all know the pleasure of giving, of donating. This is a universal preference, unfortunately, not well studied by new classical economics. So this concept is, in my opinion, is very appealing from an economic point of view and from an Islamic point of view. And we are very happy to work together on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sami, and thank you for taking us back to the roots, where really the broader concept of development and humanity stems from. Now, we've covered and looked at the MPI, and I will stick to the acronyms just so that we sound a bit more intelligent on the platform here, right? So people think we're talking about very complicated stuff. But with the MPI, the HDI, Maqasid al-Sharia, we now have a good understanding, and I think it's useful now to shift gears and look at the practicalities on the ground. And how do we forge this pathway to prosperity? Pilar, you have the benefit of being on both sides of the equation. Deputy Minister, Minister of Planning and Economic Policy in Costa Rica, and now with the OECD. During your tenure, Costa Rica launched and used its MPI. How did the MPI prove to be a valuable tool in guiding evidence-based decision-making on the ground during your tenure? We heard Sabina talk about the use of the national MPIs. So from a practical perspective, looking back during your tenure as minister, how was this used and how was this a valuable tool, if indeed it was?
So the first thing I would like to say is thank you for the possibility to join you today in this anniversary, and at the same time to commend your efforts on multidimensional poverty. It is really, really good to see the Islamic Development Bank embracing this and with its new standard ahead. So yes, in my past life, with other colleagues in a team, it was a public and private partnership. We created our own national MPI, of course, with the support of Ofi and Sabine and her wonderful team. And it was focused on analyzing where my country had the most disadvantages, and it was at the household level. So we did that analysis, and what we use it for is to be wiser in defining very hierarchical allocations of resources from our budget. Back then, Costa Rica was a very highly indebted country with a very high, over 60% debt ratio, debt to GDP ratio, and it was very important to protect our poor and most vulnerable. So we really need to be smart about those allocations. We had all the information, and we used it for that. Then we also had this social management board, so we also used it to monitor and evaluate those interventions to see if we were having the right impact. But we went one step ahead, and we also changed the way we were delivering policy, because we had those maps and we knew where people needed the most using the MPI, certain policies, connectivity or an improved house, or if they needed education or if they needed a pension. Because we knew that, then we also took our people from the ministry to knock on the doors of the people who were having that, and we brought the administration closer to the regions and to the municipalities, because we knew what they needed. And sometimes that is a big gap, because they don't have the right access, because they cannot navigate all these forms that we have in government, and that is another gap. We also took it another level, and with this public-private partnership, by the initiative with this private sector that was very committed, they also developed their own business MPI with the support of FOFI. So then the business community also took it within their employees to analyze the multidimensionally how to do it. So we had like efforts combining for coherence, and I think that was the secret of the impact back then.
Thank you, Pilar. So clearly it's helped identify where the deprivations were, where to intervene, and that has made a difference on the ground. Now, that's all great for Costa Rica. From a development practitioner's perspective, Ignacio, thank you very much once again for joining us. I know you just landed, so hopefully enough caffeine in the system, because we've got all the tough questions for you. So you meant to represent all the MDBs and give us the solutions, right? So from a practical perspective, and from an MDB, International Development Organization, how relevant have you found the MPI as a tool? And is this being used to guide interventions or better understand the challenges? And we'll stick to Latin America, given you coming from the region. So practically, how is this being used at either the Inter-American Development Bank or at the CAF at the moment?
Thank you, Arif. Thank you so much. First thing, I'm happy to have Arabic coffee more than Costa Rican coffee or Brazilian coffee. Thank you. So I would just like to say first to thank Sabina, of course, who kindly extended the invitation last week. And I'm very humbled to be here. I mean, when you see in the walls, it's very imposing. So I want to first congratulate IsDB, its chairman, the member countries, and the entire staff. Or as you say here, Mabruk, because what you've done over the last 50 years is very impressive. So that's the first one. I think speaking here, and I'm a bit surprised that you have two Latin American, when you have many other regions of the world at the ISDB. But maybe I was thinking, okay, why do we have so many Latin American? Well, unfortunately, we are one of the poorest regions of the world, but we're also the most unequal. That's the first thing I would like to stress, no? And that, of course, puts us in a different spot when we discuss about the Multidimensional Poverty Index, no? So I want to stress and I want to raise what Sabina is doing in the region. I think it's quite unique. The region is well known for certain aspects I'd like to mention. First thing, we've been working on household surveys since the 70s, that's been thanks to the World Bank who led this effort. And we have many Latin Americans within the region, no? That's the first thing. Just to give you a couple of numbers, according to, you have 145 million people in Latin America and the Caribbean living under $5.50 a day. That's, just to give you ballroom numbers, that's the entire Russian population. More important, and according to Sabina, you have here, according to Oxford and the UNDP, you would have up to 200 million people in the region living on the multidimensional poverty index. No, that's the entire population of Brazil. So just focus that you have the entire population of Brazil who be poor. That changed the entire equation for us. Or if you go even into more details, Under acute poverty, it's 33 million. That's roughly the entire population of Saudi Arabia. That's what we're talking about when we're addressing Latin America and the Caribbean. We're also discussing about the most, I would say, the fastest growing emerging urbanization region of the world. So you have 85% of a region, of a population who lives in urban, no? So that's where I want to start working. So what do we do as a regional development bank perspective? Where can we start working on this? We have at the moment, I'd like to say, 23 countries from Latin America and the Caribbean who are part of the index. However, we were just discussing with Sabina over last week that we need to do more, we need to do better. And we have tried over the past, I mean, since I think the 70s, we've been trying to work on our own index. But while if we fit at the global one, we need to do better in order to compare to our peers. I want to praise here Pilar. Costa Rica is probably one of the unique countries in the region. I'm from Uruguay, and I'm saying with very humbleness that what Costa Rica has been doing, what Pilar has been doing over the last few years, managing to put the index within the budget, it's something unique in the region. You also had some very, I would say, in Colombia, they have had this inequality table that we want to stress, the way they have been able to discuss this multidimensional within their own government. But that's the first thing. You need to have very strong institutions in countries, very strong leaders at that level that deeply understand the topic, that really want to push for it. That can only work in certain countries. I want to stress what we have had in the region and that we've shared, among others, with IsDB, the other IDB as we call it, on in Mexican and Brazilian, the Oportunidades program, the cash transfer program that started in Mexico, in our region, and that since then have been, I would say, exported to the world. But we have, and I would just want to stress one thing, migration. Migration is a recent phenomenon in Latin America and the Caribbean. And migration, unfortunately, is here to stay in our region. It's not going to be going anywhere. And it's not just migration to the US or to Europe, it's also migration for the first time within the region at a level. And thanks to the index, you can better understand migration. And it's been helping, assisting MDBs, all MDBs in the region, to move from a humanitarian approach to a development approach. That's why I want to stress the index as a tool, not only for policymakers, but as well for MDBs, to be able to target their own instruments to address and focus on social poverty.
Thank you, Ignacio. Just to follow on that, at the Islamic Development Bank, the MPI, or the Multidimensional Poverty Index, is an integral element of our strategy 2023-2025. So we've embedded this in the work that we do. In addition, the Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development uses this as part of their analysis to identify where to target their interventions and where we could have the biggest impact. So clearly being used quite a bit at the Islamic Development Bank, and this is gaining more traction and being mainstreamed in the work we do. We hope that in this way we are better able to shift the realities of the poorest groups in our member countries. Now, across the developing world pre-crisis, we've seen significant progress in combating poverty. However, the pandemic and the other global other crises has resulted in dramatic changes in the global development landscape, including a reversal on the poverty gains, unfortunately. Sabina, any lessons we can draw from the work you've done around the world to better understand how some countries have proved to be more resilient, if we have the data, and better navigate the poly-crisis? Or do you think countries using the MPI have tended to fare better or been able to navigate slightly better? Any thoughts on that, Sabina?
Thank you so much. I think one reality is that when we measure poverty, we use data. And after the pandemic, for example, for the global multidimensional poverty index, there's a dearth of data. In many countries, we do not have updated data. The poorest country we reported in 2023 was Niger, but that data set is from 2012. We have data from billionaires every hour on Forbes' website, but in the poorest country, we have data on acute poverty more than 12 years ago. Burkina Faso, we dropped last year because the data were too old, from 2011. We've dropped Somalia as well. And so one real need is for up-to-date data so that we can see and keep responding to the poorest places, but also celebrate how poverty has gone down. But to turn to some of the positive stories, we cover trends over time for 39 member countries. And the fastest reduction was in Sierra Leone, in Togo, in Mali, in Guinea, in Bangladesh. So a number of member countries had fantastic reductions. For example, Sierra Leone, from 2013 to 2017, reduced poverty from 74% to 58%, the fastest of any country. That was during the Ebola crisis. Everyone says it was messy, mistakes were made, but for the very basic deprivations that touch poor people's lives, there was still significant historic progress. The same levels and magnitudes in Togo, in Guinea, in some time periods. So that is a clear win. It's something that needs to be studied more, that we need to find out from those governments what went right and what we can learn from them going forward. And that's why I think that the member countries are a true resource, not only within the region, but for the world, because these also are very high poverty countries. But a place like Bangladesh reduced poverty from 38 to 24% in 5 years. 19 million people left poverty. That again shows that in a middle poverty country, it's possible to make historic changes. But there are also countries where there was not significant change, from Burkina Faso to Benin, and those are difficulties, and the state of Palestine as well. And so there are places where poverty progress has stalled, or as we know, has increased, including drastically. And these are of particular interest to us. What has happened at the national level? I'll take a couple examples. For example, in Sierra Leone, they now have a national MPI, and that can go into the national plan. That can be used consciously as a tool for shaping progress. Other countries in the region have announced that they are in the process of developing national MPIs, such as Chad, again, a very challenging context, or Indonesia. And with UNDP in Yemen, for the 9 internationally recognized territories, they've also constructed an MPI with more current data, enabling us to track changes over time and plan prospectively using up-to-date data sets. And the data set in Afghanistan will be updated this year using Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey 2023 of MIX. So there are some countries where having an explicit framework, having more up-to-date data, and having the MPI in the national policy space as an explicit tool, I think will be helpful going forward. And most of all, we are hoping with this partnership to learn from many of you how we could do more, how the MPI could be of use where you are sitting, and what you have already learned, why there was stellar progress in a number of ISDB member countries. Thank you.
I think, Sabina, you touched on Afghanistan and Yemen. Abdullah, you have led the fight on poverty, or against poverty, in one of the most challenging parts of the world. No easy feat, and kudos to you and the team at the UNDP for keeping the fight going. We've recently completed the joint work with the UNDP, UNICEF, OFI on the multidimensional poverty in Afghanistan. We're working currently on the one for Yemen. Abdullah, can you share with us your insights on the use of MPI to drive policy making and interventions in challenging, fragile, and conflict-affected situations? And I think you're most ideally poised to talk about this at the moment. Also, not a very easy question.
I'm not sure this is a very good thing that I am in this position. Nonetheless, MPI has served and will serve as an excellent tool to help us identify the priorities, the policies, allocation of resources, especially at a time of scarcer resources. Our program in Afghanistan, which is called ABADE, the Area-Based Approach for Development Emergency, benefited from all the data available before preliminary work on MPI and the data collection, and now it will be better targeted with the new MPI coming out. This is very important because at the time when you have a political situation with a de facto authority, we have to take the responsibility of where is the best distribution, what's the best allocation of resources, and in a very precarious situation, to say the least. I believe that we have achieved some successes using the data from the MPI. We have managed to identify 70,000 women-owned enterprises in Afghanistan to support them in order to survive at this time. In fact, those 70,000 women entrepreneurs are now the backbone of rural community economy in a country that has suddenly lost all its international support. So MPI in this context has proven to be extremely useful in the context of shortage of resources. But there is another context where we are starting in Libya a new program, and we believe that the question of wealth distribution is the problem in Libya. It's not a question of availability of funds. There's plenty of money. But the wealth distribution, by bringing the MPI into allocation of resources, it gives a sense of equity, it gives a sense of evidence-based. Why am I going to allocate resources to that region, to that sector, to that sub-region, and to this group of individuals? Because there is an evidence-based approach that is neutral, scientific, that allows us to do this distribution in a more robust way. So each context differs. Now we are planning the rebuilding of Gaza. As we speak, most of the plans have already been done, and we are ready to step in the moment there is a ceasefire. We are going to use the MPI developed by ESCWA and OFI in order to see, and not only Gaza, we are talking about the recovery of the Palestinian economy in general. And therefore, we are going to use the MPI plus the data from the destruction in order to better target the resources that we have. And again, we don't live in a resource ODA-rich environment at the moment as we speak because of so many conflicts attracting those resources. And therefore, MPI becomes extremely important. Last point, at least on the Arab region that I am responsible for in UNDP, many countries in the region, and the region in general, is looking for a new social contract. It's moving beyond the rentier economy it has depended on for the last decades. And one of the ways to move towards this more participatory, inclusive, equitable, and sustainable social contract is to use the MPI in designing these new policies, in these new approaches, because it will allow the peoples to feel they own this new social contract. I'll stop here.
Abdullah, I'm not going to let you off the hook yet. I'm not going to let you off the hook yet, just as it. So one of the issues when working in fragile and conflict-affected situations, clearly the use of the MPI important and evidence-based decision-making critical, but how do you navigate that minefield? Excuse the pun.
So for example, everything we say in this context is explosive, and you are going to do a faux pas whether you like it or not. So let me try not to step on a mine and blow up the whole. So in Yemen, we have an MPI now for the 9 districts controlled by the internationally recognized government. But we are now, as UNDP, starting to design a Yemen recovery program. Do we think about all of Yemen or 9 districts? And this is a very critical and difficult, politically and diplomatically difficult, legal difficult issue. But we have to navigate it. In Libya, we don't have, let's say, we have a government that we work with, but we have other authorities in other parts of the country. How do you develop a national MPI with this political situation? Syria will have to be rebuilt sooner or later, and we will need an MPI. How do you operate in that context? The good thing, if I may use that term, is that we in UNDP are used to this. We are accustomed to working in these difficult environments. We are on the ground everywhere, north and south of Yemen, in east and west of Libya, in areas controlled by the government in Damascus and areas not controlled by the government in Damascus. We are there on the ground with our expertise, and we are willing to take those risks that would bring us one step further along this road.
Thank you very much. I think that clarity is important, that it's about humanity, it's about the people.
Yes.
And I think it brings to the fore, and you've stressed this quite a lot through your intervention, on the importance of evidence-based decision-making to ensure that we have the maximum impact, we reach the right people, even in complex and challenging situations. The ISDB membership ranges from Suriname in the west to Indonesia in the east. And as we chart a pathway to prosperity, we need to acknowledge the importance of financing and partnerships, even more so given the recent polycrisis. According to the OECD, ODA reached a record high of approximately 224 billion in 2023, and a lot more fragile context. So even though the money has increased significantly, there's a lot more places that it needs to go to. Pilar, from an OECD perspective, 31 of our member countries are classified as being in a fragile context. What options do we have for scaling up concessional financing and forging stronger partnerships to support low-income countries and countries in fragile and conflict-affected situations? Any policy options to help us better target our interventions to gain the maximum bang for our buck in terms of empowering the poorest?
So the first thing I would like to mention is that that along that category of fragile, there are many kinds of different contexts, and those require and enable different kinds of financial instruments. I would say in that, just to give us an idea, in that 224 billion, if we were to go narrow, we haven't yet done an MPI measurement. We could think about it and develop it together. But for now, out of that 224 billion, only 19.6 billion is actually oriented to target extreme poverty or poverty defined by SDG indicator 1.1. So as you could say, this represents 9% of all the total ODA. So it means that there is a lot more to be done. This is, of course, bilateral grants. The increase right now in the 224 billion was driven by multilaterals. So there is a lot of resources that are going to multilaterals, and most of it has to be linked with replenishments for IDA and other programs that target poverty. So that is one part of it. ODA is not the only available tool in the broader development cooperation toolkit. There is also technical assistance, and there is also other bits. Debt is a major issue for most of the fragile countries. So for those require specific measurements and specific financial instruments to address. For those that can, then to alleviate that debt, then you will have those instruments being sort of a no loan or that looks into policy options, or you would actually look into sustainability-linked bonds as an alternative where you put a focus on social dimensions linked to poverty, and that is more fungible, and it could be an option that could be used to target certain aspects of that MPI that could be in order to bring them out of poverty while enabling an environment. And of course, the usual cash transference, budgetary support, although I may also admit that they have moved away from budgetary support lately. So I would say there is a need to rethink the complete toolkit, but based on the particularities of specific countries and to how to accompany them better along their own pathway. And the MPI is one of those important measures in order to decide whether to issue a blended instrument or to go for a cash transference or a budgetary support or a loan that enables you to do that. But it really has to speak to that fragile country, to the macroeconomics of the country, but also to the vulnerabilities and specific dimensions of fragility of that country.
I think rethinking the toolkit is an important element, and Sami, we haven't forgotten you. So while we're rethinking the toolkit and picking up on Pilar's point, the aspect of scaling up financing, and we know that Islamic finance has a significant untapped potential, and if leveraged, could play a transformational role in our quest to chart a pathway to prosperity. Can you share with us the role of Islamic finance in socio-economic development and tackling the SDGs, and then also maybe if you could touch a little bit on the fragile context and the role of Islamic finance. So Pilar, Sami is going to help us understand perhaps broadening that toolkit.
Thank you again. As we all know, Islamic finance has two very important pillars: the commercial side or for-profit domain and the non-profit domain or the social domain. On the regulations or the principles governing the commercial activity, the prohibition of usury, prohibition of gambling, and so on, while on the social or non-profit domain, we have zakat, we have awqaf, we have charity, interest-free loans, and so on. What's happening in the Islamic finance industry is that the for-profit domain is dominating. The IsDB, the Islamic Development Bank, has been pioneering in leading the awqaf in particular and other forms of social Islamic finance. And that's, now we are seeing a revival of the awqaf sector in many member countries, and in some member countries, actually, this sector is huge. And they could play, of course, a very important role in bridging the problems of poverty and deprivation. But if we look at the approach of Islamic finance when it comes to zakat and awqaf, it is in general decentralized in the sense that each community in principle should pay the zakat to the same community. That's in principle. Of course, there is nothing wrong in sending the zakat to other areas or region, but there seems to be a kind of a priority for the community. It's a decentralized approach, and that's a question, if you allow me to ask Sabina, that while the Multidimensional Poverty Index aims to develop national and regional standards and policies, which is very important, we agree on this. However, when it comes to execution, wouldn't it be more effective to have a decentralized approach? Now, if you consider the fragile countries, and in some cases, there is no government in the first place. So the issue of centralized versus decentralized there's no choice. So probably having a decentralized approach, or at least a balanced approach between centralization and decentralization, probably would be quite helpful. I would like to listen to Sabina and other members of the panel. Thank you. Now I'm switching the role, but you don't.
Sabina, he's taken over the moderator role. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. So many countries that have national MPIs very vigorously communicate them at subnational level. So Mexico, which began the work, went to all the 17 states of Mexico to communicate the MPI. More recently, Nigeria relaunched its MPI with disaggregations to the senatorial district level, and governors are very key. And as we know in Yobe or in the northern states, the poverty is very different than in the south. And so really understanding it, doing state-level reports, state-level indicator priorities, as was done also in Afghanistan for the 34-35 governorates. Those are very important because they give something tangible. But if there are not data, and in some places there are not data in conflict-affected areas, but people in those areas can use other options to look at the deprivations and to fight them. And I think we have to be broad-minded about that. The last thing would be to say in Vietnam, they tried that. So they tried doing locally designed MPIs that were different, but they found then you couldn't compare one region with the other. And when they wanted to then see who did better, there was not that clarity. But as you said, in some cases that's relevant, in some cases that's not. What's really important is to go to the local level, and whether it is Colombia, whether it is Vietnam, whether it is Bhutan, whether it is Angola, many countries also include MPI in the census or in the social registry for who is targeted, because having that household level data means that local government can act, civil society can act if they have the access to the data. And this is a big project. We need many people involved. And so the more the data can be made available so different groups can make it their project to help. I think that the better.
Abdullah, we're going to jump to you because on the ground you're working in countries where the institutions may no longer exist. The centralized system has collapsed. How do you navigate that? So let's help Sami understand navigating that challenge. Ignacio, we're coming back to you.
Well, I wanted to say that in the current resource envelope globally for development, we have to combine funding with financing. And Islamic financing is an essential, even in non-Muslim countries, should they choose to. Because, and the MPI will allow us then to identify which is the most effective type of financing that we can bring to a particular context. There will be contexts where we will need zakat and we will need non-profit Islamic financing. And there will be contexts where we will need actually for-profit Islamic financing or other types of finance. In Afghanistan, we combined grants with soft loans and we combined credit guarantees with those loans and with these grants in order to provide access to finance for these 70,000 women entrepreneurs. So even in a country where we don't recognize officially the authorities there, we managed to build these revolving funds, we managed to provide Islamic finance facilities to a large number of people. And I think therefore combining funding with financing, one, and secondly combining that with the MPI to identify which is the most effective combination in each sector, group, and locality is an extremely important way of moving forward. And we as UNDP, again, we are working with the Islamic Development Bank, expanding our partnership, and with OFI to combine those two sources of knowledge and decision-making.
So partnerships, funding and financing, and the MPI to make a difference on the ground. I think, Sabina.
I just wanted to have 1-2 finger, using the example from Colombia. In Colombia, with the 40-year civil war, the President Santos realized he couldn't build peace without poverty. And in 2015, for the first time, they were able to get data of FARC-affected territories, the territories that were not under governmental control. And they realized that while 22% of people in Colombia were poor, in the conflict-affected territories, it was over 80%. And so part of the peace deal in that country was the Havana Accord, was how MPI would be reduced in the rural areas and in those territories, how ex-combatants would be brought in, how the victims would be compensated. So that's one example where having some data perhaps was an acceleration for a recognition that you needed a joined-up approach.
Ignacio.
I'd like to pick up on that example precisely, and bring a perspective of MDBs. So you mentioned Colombia post-conflict. I believe that 2/3 of your member countries of the ISDB are going through what you call the least developed countries. Colombia is a perfect example. So while you just praised it in the previous question, saying that they have this unique institution, strong institution, led by the planning department that coordinates among them. At the same time, just like Sabina mentioned, on what they call PEDETs, which is the poorest territories that are precisely affected by the conflict. We've been trying to, for example, I'm going to take the Pacific Coast. Pacific Coast is probably the poorest region in Colombia. You have 1,400 kilometers. You don't have a single hospital in the entire Pacific Coast that goes from Panama to Ecuador. Not a single hospital. There are many, many reasons. I used to be country rep of the other IDB in Colombia. I know it well. And we were trying to work on a tourist project. How come we're focusing everything on the Caribbean, the lovely Caribbean beaches, but nothing on the Pacific? That can be job creation and precisely to target poverty. There's security, but then we came up, and that's something I want to stress, with a reality approach. First thing, we don't act as MDBs, but not only MDBs, also IFIs. We don't act in a coordinated way. Countries do not have a single strategy for each one of us. That's something that we need to. And we need to go within our MDBs beyond the approach where we have a sector approach. I mean, we all have a vice presidency of sectors. We're leading the way, and because at the end of the day, we have incentive within each bank of who gives the loans. That's who gives the credit within the banks. We need to go beyond that approach to move to a sectorial strategic approach. So we need, for example, in the Pacific, like in the PEDET, but we need the transport section of the bank, the water section, the education people, the trade people to focus on those. We have the same problem on drug eradication problems in Colombia as well, in the same PEDETs, no? And it goes beyond us. We need to work with each one of us, of the banks. At the World Bank, when you enter last week, where most of us were probably at the spring meetings, you enter the World Bank and it says a world free of poverty, which is a very ambitious target they have. We don't have we don't have that goal. It goes way beyond us. We are, I would say, just like the ISDB, we're a global South bank. And I would like to stress, and just to be polemic, because at the end of the panel, we go, and that's why we embrace the Multidimensional Poverty Index. We do not, I would say, we do not graduate at CAF, the bank I work for. We don't do graduation, unlike other banks. We believe in our region, for example, some countries are graduated by the OECD DAC. We disagree, we strongly disagree with the definition that are led by few countries within the OECD DAC. We fully agree with the UNDP and Sabina are doing at Oxford. We believe it targets much more and reflects much more what our countries are facing too. There's, for example, Bahamas within the Caribbean. Certain countries are prone to natural disaster, to hurricane. And those countries, while they can be graduated by the DAC, as soon as we have a hurricane, they go way backwards within their list. There's a British agenda that Prime Minister Motley from Barbados is trying to lead at the global DAC. I just want to stress one thing. We do have a very much focused discussion on the green agenda, and we fully embrace it, of course. We should not forget, just like Pilar mentioned, the social aspect as well. Our Latin America and the Caribbean, we've been working a lot on green bonds. We're one of the regions with the most green bonds, local currency bonds, very much advanced. We haven't done much on social bonds. It's about time that MDBs, we start working on social bonds. Those are very easy. We just need to target on education, on gender, migration, and then we can go and publish our own bonds, and I'm sure they're going to be bought by German, by Japanese, by other markets. No? We need to tap into sovereign wealth fund. I mean, here we're in the Gulf. We have an Arab Coordination Group is doing something in this regard. I want to praise the Arab Coordination Group that they're one of the very few donors who still work on the social sector. Many others have left the social sector. But we need to tap on the private sector. And then I just want to finish with one issue that Sabina mentioned, which is data. That's something that we need to go into. And that's, where do you find data nowadays? You find data in, for example, in the digital sector. So MDBs have been working with the digital companies. We've been working with Telefonica precisely to know, to be able to map out where are the migrants in Colombia, just go again. They're not on the border. We're much surprised. They're in Barranquilla, most of them. A few of them are in, if you take the radio. And I want to finish with one that you just mentioned, instruments. We really need to focus on instruments. Last week, ISDB led among the other MDBs a resolution among all the MDBs focused on impact and scaling up. Yeah. But the key here is financial instruments. We need to work on together on PBL, where you have added value. We need to work a lot on disbursement results, and as you just mentioned, guarantees. That, I would say, is the key for MDBs to address this.
So Ignacio, before I jump to you, Pilar, I know you have something to say, but Ignacio, you talked about scaling up. Now, many of our member countries are in debt distress and have budgetary constraints. From an MDB perspective, how are we going to scale up? The challenge is quite severe, especially amongst the developing countries.
I thought you would ask the ISDB the tough questions. They're the host. No, I would strongly advise you to read what was published last week. I mean, the scaling up, what we need to do is we're about to go in 10 years from Addis Ababa, from billion to trillions. Of course, we had the COVID. I'm afraid that the results from the SDGs are very much shy. SDGs, by the way, were born in Latin America and the Caribbean for the Rio meeting. We had it back in the 90s. On the G20 is going to be happening now in end of the year in Brazil. We're going back to Rio. And we can ask ourselves, what have we been doing? What have we succeeded and what have we not? So we have two options. We can say, well, we can blame the pandemic, or we can go and say, we need to go beyond and tell us to focus on something beyond the Agenda 2030. And I think this is what Riyadh is precisely doing. And I want to praise ISDB, which is precisely going the next phase. I want to praise the UNDP or Oxford, for example. And I'm sure the OECD with the DAC are going to be working with me in this sense. But luckily, we have people like Pilar at the OECD to be able to change those mindsets. So what we can do to scale up is I think we need to certainly tap into the private sector. We cannot, I mean, you were mentioning that money is not the issue. I was thinking about the song Money Can Buy Me Love, among other things. But more important, I would say, we have to be humble. I mean, MDBs can provide certain amount of resources, but I was just thinking Philippines, for example, El Salvador, they have more resources from remittances than from MDBs.
Thank you for that. And just, to pick up on the point on the Arab Coordination Group, very close partners with the Islamic Development Bank, and were very quick to come to the party when we were facing the food crisis, and it was an over $10 billion response. So I think an important element in terms of the whole area of partnerships and bringing additional sources of financing and funding to the table. Pilar, you had something that you were burning to say.
No, it was, perhaps it's already too late, but I will not keep it for myself. No, it's just to say that if it's a conflict-affected country, then of course humanitarian and humanitarian plus, which is what we have been seeing lately, it is what you would actually see in the crisis response. You would have bilaterals tend not to be as present because they don't have their competitive advantage and there are other issues that they are analyzing. But MDB is the response. They go through multilateral organizations, and now every time we see more is what we have been in the DAC sort of having this new approach of locally led development, where some of your concerns in how to tap into those local organizations can actually help and bridge and enable, when the time is right, high political dialogues that then would actually enable a coordination with the line ministries and then with centers of government afterwards. But it is important to sort of to be clear that each country, depending on where they are and the conflicts, they also have different instruments that you can actually deploy. And another important element of your reflection, and what Ignacio also said eloquently, is thinking about debt. Is, as of now, there is no systemic debt that the IMF speaks about. But it is true that when we see the balance sheets of countries, you see that a lot of the bonds are maturing right now and in the next 3 years. And that means that you're actually, a lot of the budget goes to service debt instead of investing in multidimensional poverty policy solutions. So that balance and how not to do it while we scale up when the time is right, with the right instruments, is also the way. And this is also why I think, and I will echo also his words in terms of bringing more. There's sort of impact investments that I know that you do a lot, or blended finance schemes like GSS, and particularly sustainability linked, because those really speak to MPI. Last word, yes, the DAC we use GNI, which is not perfect, but there is an open discussion about how, using other criteria like vulnerability, but MPI or others, you could actually think about concessional finance to complement that process. So it is an open discussion, and pretty much also inspired by seeds, to be very frank.
Clearly, the pathway to prosperity is not a straight road. There's a lot of work to be done.
It comes in waves.
And I think one of the things that has recurred through all the interventions is this issue of driving evidence-based decision-making to make sure that we have the maximum impact. And Sabina, you clearly highlighted in your earlier interventions the lack of data and the lack of timely data. Now, there's the thing, you spoke of the billionaires and literally data on the fly. So, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. But also at the same time, you get what you measure. Now, Sabina, help us understand. We've had this major challenge on the data. Are the current metrics sufficient? Do we have gaps that we need to fill? Is the global and national MPI, does this give us sufficient to be able to chart this pathway to prosperity? Any thoughts on this one, Sabina?
I think there are two gaps. So as I said, the current global MPI, for example, that we do with UNDP, has had some stellar successes in member countries. But if you look across all 39 countries, only 33 had significant reductions. But even in those that did, whether it's Pakistan or Nigeria, Chad, Niger, there were significant reductions, but they weren't fast enough. And if you look across the countries and the time periods, and then also look at the increase in the number of people, only 33 million people came out of poverty in the time periods we cover. And if you look at the people who are poor, half of them are children. So having better data for the global MPI or national MPIs is vital, and addressing acute poverty in member countries is vital. It's not going fast enough at scale. But also, I mentioned the global MPI covers 1.6 billion people in 42 countries, member countries of ISDB. For 1 billion, maybe it's okay, because 11% or more of their population are poor. But for 18 countries, 624 million people, and 184 subnational regions of ISDB member countries, less than 10% of the people are poor by the global MPI. But the standards, whether it's Palestine, Uzbekistan, Albania, or the capital cities of Lagos, for example, the standards are higher in those countries. The need for a metric that really represents their deprivation is acute. And so the global MPI measuring acute multidimensional poverty needs to be complemented by another measure of more moderate poverty that captures the existing but very important deprivations in many member countries. And so our hope would be that, I don't know, that Sami, there would be some ideas you might have.
Sami, ball's in your court. We have this challenge of the data and getting to a better understanding of, Sabina, you call this moderate poverty, if I got the terminology right. Sami, any thoughts? How can we address this? I know you're involved on an initiative, we're working on this, so maybe it would be a good opportunity to announce the work that we plan on doing.
As I said in the beginning, we are very sympathetic with this concept of multidimensional poverty index. It shows the universality of the principles of Islamic finance, and it shows how we can contribute to the prosperity of humanity in general. Now, the technical details, I will not be able to say a word in the presence of the expert, but we are very proud to announce that we are now approaching the final stages of formalizing the relationship between the IsDB, the Islamic Development Bank, and the Oxford program for poverty index led by Dr. Sabina. And this is obviously a group initiative. It's the IsDB, the ISFD, the Institute, together with the Oxford initiative. And as Sabina has mentioned, there are gaps between global and local, and obviously we have to see how to manage this gap. Obviously, data are very important, and as people are saying, the new oil is data. So let's hope that this program or this initiative will bring in plenty of data, plenty of insights, evidence-based or evidence-guided policies and standards that will ultimately contribute to the prosperity of our member countries.
So Sami, if I heard you correctly, I'm just emphasizing, the ISDB is going to be embarking on an initiative to help fill this gap and launch a new index for countries that have this moderate multidimensional poverty. So inshallah, I think this is really a good initiative, and we look forward to the impact that this has had. On data being the new oil, there's a study which shows that for every $1 invested in data systems, the return on that investment is $32. So clearly, money well spent, and we look forward to getting this initiative off the ground and having an impact on the lives of the millions of people, not just in our member countries, but across the globe that could benefit from this new index that would be developed out of the joint initiative by the ISDB, OFI, and our member countries. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to give the audience a chance to ask a couple of questions. But while we look towards the audience, just for the panelists, I'm going to come back to you for a 30-second key takeaway, one takeaway per person, when we get back after the Q&A. So Q&A, our original, one of the founder board members of the IsDB, can we get a mic up front, please? So when you make your intervention, please introduce yourself, and the question, if it's to a specific panelist, please identify the panelist you would like to target. So the question's right up front. Right up front, right in the front. Thank you. We'll take 3 questions, and then we'll go to the second round.
D'accord, bonjour. It is not for question.
My name is Dr. Amado, and I'm a professor in the university. Can I ask the question? So talking about the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation, and the Islamic Development Bank. You have indicated that in 2005 there was an extraordinary summit in the city of Mecca, which was headed by the late King Abdullah ibn Abdulaziz, and the purpose of it was to chart a plan in order to fight poverty in the Islamic countries, and the attempt to create the Islamic Solidarity Fund for $20 billion, and at the same time the ITFC, the International Trade Financing Cooperation, in order to boost trade between the member states. And the leaders of the OIC had the opportunity to discuss providing jobs for the young people and to improve the situation in the member states. That was a very important policy for the OIC in some of the member states, such as Bangladesh and Malaysia. I'd like to refer to an important point. There should be national policies that are good and proper planning, and what is more important is the implementation of the plans themselves, and these plans cannot be implemented without the engagement of the people. So I think the development of the plans is something critical, yes, but if the population is not engaged, the plans will be a failure. So we wanted you to shed light on that. And for the Islamic finance, I remember that we had a summit in Conakry with the participation of the Islamic Development Bank.
Where this need to be elaborated. The Conakry initiative, very important initiative, with some head of state coming, like the head of state of Mali, Prime Minister of Senegal, Prime Minister of Gambia, to attend the conference. And that's President of IDB. But the Ministry of Planning was in charge of that. And then they follow up. Such initiatives need to be implemented and followed on a reasonable basis to make linkage between Islamic financing and poverty alleviation. I thought this very important for Islamic perspective. That's why I wanted to expose that.
Thank
it's
you
very
very
important
much
to contribute to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that intervention. And I think it's an important point in terms of implementation and moving forward. It's not just the planning and the declarations, but in how we make sure we do the implementations. Let's take a second question a comment from the back.
Thank you very much, the panelists. I am Dr. Milati Mustafa from KS Relief, King Salman Humanitarian Aid. My question is to Sabrina and Abdullah. You discussed a lot about the fragile states. What about the IDPs? Can we use this multiple poverty index, multidimensional poverty index for the IDPs when they're very mobile? You know, they can't stay in one place. This is the first challenge because we tried to measure as well, but after 2-3 months, they move from one place to another place. Okay, first. And my second question about the data quality, because this data, when you have to standardize it, each country has got, maybe they're using same tool, but there might be some questions about the data quality. How do you just ensure that all the data that you're using now, they are maintaining certain standards? Thank you very much.
And we'll take one question from Dr. Ghazali.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Ghazali. I'm Secretary General of the World Workout Conference. I was in the bank before. My question is directed to Sister Dr. Sabina and Abdullah. I look at the topic and it's very controversial. You are from Oxford University. We are the rest of the third world down here. We have inherited the new economic order or the old order from Oxford, our masters before. I think, to be honest, we should call the title today to be called it a gateway to equilibrium prosperity. Because the major problems in all the third world countries, you know very well. Africa, whatnot. Who owns the wealth of Africa? Who owns the wealth? So the problem today is not multidimensional. It is unequal equilibrium problem of economics. And today, for the rest of the in the room, we are talking about geopolitics and geoeconomics. So the discussion is a continuity of 70 years of unsolved philosophical framework where I think we must return to the fundamentals of what Dr. Sami was talking about, ethics, immorality in economics, in politics, and the rest of it all. Then we have the problem. I don't think you will solve the problem if you ignore the fundamental philosophical which ties all civilization. So my point here is that we need a new economic order based on civilizational building framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that point, Dr. Ghazali. A new world order. Sabina, Abdullah, you want to respond to the first two comments on the data quality, etc.?
Thank you so much. So first on internally displaced persons, or IDBs, or indeed on refugees, which are people who cross borders out of forced migration needs. The question was whether we can do MPIs for those. And the answer is increasingly yes, but with some caveats. So for example, the World Bank had data sets for 5 countries in the Horn of Africa on IDBs, and we were able to analyze the poverty status of IDBs and compare it with the host populations, and also to look with a gendered lens on women, internally displaced persons, and their distinctive features of poverty. And in most places, but not in all, the IDBs were poorer than the host communities. But as I said, not in all. There were some where they were at par or the host community was poorer, though not in an IDB member country. So where the data are available, that is possible. But with the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, increasingly they are gathering data which permits them to track migrants as they change location. And with UNHCR, we are exploring the possibility of doing an MPI using their variables or slight modifications of them. It's not perfect, but it is agreed that we need something for these populations and that their needs are distinct. And they are also distinct whether they live in camps or integrated in communities. And also they are distinct because often the work ethic is very strong. About data quality, in terms of the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, which OFI and UNDP jointly compute, we check the data quality of the surveys, and we guarantee it, and we do not release numbers that do not come from it. In terms of national data sets, some national MPIs come from those data sets, but many come from national data sets. And with those, again, as colleagues, as friends, as little sisters and brothers, we validate with the Statistics Authority those data, and we do not put our name to data sets that have been, it's easy to find out if data are not accurate. And so those that are officialized OFI checks, and before they go into the SDG database, World Bank, UNDP, and UNICEF also check. So there are some
we're running short of time. I just want to bring Abdullah. Any thoughts on the IDPs and the data quality issues? You wanted to say something on that?
Yes.
Please.
We all have this. Even the refugees and the IDPs have this. But the question is, would an MDB or an IFI lend somebody, a refugee or an IDP, directly to their mobile phones, bypassing the classical ways of doing business? Because we are living in a different world today, technology-wise, accessibility-wise, and so on. So this is a question for us. I'm not suggesting an answer yet, but I don't think we can continue working in the same old ways. We need to think otherwise. I'd like to address the question of the whole system, and in 1 minute. Look at Africa. The whole political economy of Africa was structured around the donor-recipient relationship, the post-colonial donor-recipient relationship. Today in Africa, in 2023, Africa received about $40 billion of aid, but Africa itself invested $800 billion in its own development. And that explains these tectonic shifts we see in Africa happening, because this unease with the post-colonial political economy of Africa and the relationship with the donor countries. How do we then capture that in our new economic models is a big question that we are all dealing with. But I think there is an agreement today that doing business as usual is no longer valid. Changing the power relationships in the global economy is happening, whether we like it or not. It is happening, and bringing the people into the picture as active participant with agency and voice and not just a recipient are just some of the principles we need to develop. And I think the MPI, going back to our subject today, helps us to do this, but it's not the panacea. It's a political decision, actually, what we are talking about. It's not a technical question. MPI is a technical tool to help political decision makers take that big decision.
I'm going to leave it there and go back to Ignacio. 30 seconds, your one key takeaway.
So you caught me off guard.
Just checking the coffee is still working.
I was just thinking about what you were saying, which is very ambitious, and I think that where MDBs need to work on, and where precisely what we're doing here at CAF is trying to embrace this global south perspective. We have new actors. I want to stress, just to add to your question, we have new actors, new voices. As I said, I want to praise ISDB for these 50 years, its chairman, its member countries, and its staff. And we want to work more among those two geographies, the Gulf and Latin America. We believe we have a lot to learn, lessons learned that goes beyond investment, but also precisely on these multinational poverty index that you're trying to lead now. And I want to congratulate UNDP and, of course, Oxford to be working along the way. I think the SDG 17, that we should all work together, march together, is precisely what we should embrace. So, Mabruk, as you say, and thank you so much for this kind invitation.
Thank you. Pilar, your 30-second single takeaway.
So my single takeaway would be based on the need of going back to the mission, sort of how to concentrate donor efforts into what the ISDB, I would say, does differently than most of the other donors, which is still focusing a lot in terms of these social investments and these social innovations that come with the new tools of financing, but really concentrating on that. And how could that come in together as one, thinking about a broader sort of system where the MDBs, the bilaterals, organizations, and with their bilateral DFIs, and with the ownership and the leadership. That is my takeaway from what I heard, with the agency of countries and people can actually be taken forward in order to transform that. Only acting together, MDBs, bilaterals, and with people and its agencies, it's possible to go back. Innovations we could think about, we could navigate specific context, and then we know what to pull out of the broader toolkit. But this really like a stronger coordination for coherence and in order to guarantee impact would be my takeaway.
Thank you, Pilar. Sami, your quick takeaway? And slightly shorter than Pilar's 30 seconds.
I would say actions speak louder than words. And such programs as the Multidimensional Poverty Index that we are working together aims to impact the lives of people on the ground. And that would deliver the message rather than spending years and years philosophizing on the economic order. Better to get on the road and work with people directly. Thank you.
Let's talk more action. Abdullah.
I want to bring to your kind attention, the fact that in the Maghreb, North Africa region, and Sahel today together, we have 200 million people under the age of 16. We need a dynamic MPI that looks at, because Pilar mentioned maturities of debt. Now we have a maturity of a generation of 200 million people coming into either education systems or the labor market. And I am not sure we measure the readiness of the regions to absorb them into educational systems, health, social services, and into jobs. So the challenge is, this is at least a $2 trillion project, right? And with the migration pressures and so on, our partnerships are becoming existential for these parts of the world, and that are producing migration and that are producing instability for themselves and for the rest of the world. So addressing this question as an example is a global public good that we should all invest in. Using MPI and maybe a more time dynamic MPI in the near future. Thank you.
Sabina, your 30-second takeaway?
So poverty is primarily, I think, an ethical, a moral issue. And numbers like the MPI can make it visible, can make it tractable what to do to address it with high impact and cost effectively. But the numbers don't matter unless ministers of finance, unless the business sector, unless different agencies take it up and use these numbers, share them with the grassroots to make change. So the hope is that the MPI will not stay in shelves or in academia, but it will be used as a tool, and it will help people who are committed to reducing poverty do so effectively and quickly.
Thank you very much. I'm aware that there were additional questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we can't take them now. We can take them offline if need be, but please join me in thanking the panelists for a really exciting and stimulating discussion. It's been really interesting and thought-provoking. And Sami, I'm going to leave with your words. Action speaks louder than words. So we look forward to the new index and the work taking place. And we, hopefully this then becomes a measure that allows us, or a new metric that helps us better understand multidimensional poverty and have a direct impact on the lives of people on the ground. So thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome to the heart of innovation, where the sand dunes of time meet the waves of progress. Welcome to Riyadh, the pulsating capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In the cradle of civilization, where dreams soar higher than the desert dunes, a beacon of hope rises. For 5 decades, the IsDB has been a catalyst for change, empowering nations and transforming lives. As we celebrate half a century of resilience, determination, and progress, join us for a monumental event under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Ministers, policymakers, industry leaders, and changemakers from 57 member countries and many partner organizations will converge to better shape the future of sustainable development. From 27th to 30th of April 2024, Riyadh will be the epicenter of global dialogue and collaboration. Join us as we continue this collective journey of collaboration, inspiration, and transformation. 2024 IsDB Group Annual Meetings and Golden Jubilee, celebrating 50 years of impact, innovation, and partnership. Cherishing our past, charting our future. Welcome to the heart of innovation, where the sand dunes of time meet the waves of progress. Welcome to Riyadh, the pulsating capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In the cradle of civilization, where dreams soar higher than the desert dunes, a beacon of hope rises. For 5 decades, the IsDB has been a catalyst for change, empowering nations and transforming lives. As we celebrate half a century of resilience, determination, and progress, join us for a monumental event under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Ministers, policymakers, industry leaders, and changemakers from 57 member countries and many partner organizations will converge to better shape the future of sustainable development. From 27th to 30th of April 2024, Riyadh will be the epicenter of global dialogue and collaboration. Join us as we continue this collective journey of collaboration, inspiration, and transformation. 2024 IsDB Group Annual Meetings and Golden Jubilee, celebrating 50 years of impact, innovation, and partnership. Cherishing our past, charting our future. Welcome to the heart of innovation, where the sand dunes of time meet the waves of progress. Welcome to Riyadh, the pulsating capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In the cradle of civilization, where dreams soar higher than the desert dunes, a beacon of hope rises. For 5 decades, the IsDB has been a catalyst for change, empowering nations and transforming lives. As we celebrate half a century of resilience, determination, and progress, join us for a monumental event under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Ministers, policymakers, industry leaders, and changemakers from 57 member countries and many partner organizations will converge to better shape the future of sustainable development. From 27th to 30th of April 2024, Riyadh will be the epicenter of global dialogue and collaboration. Join us as we continue this collective journey of collaboration, inspiration, and transformation. 2024 IsDB Group Annual Meetings and Golden Jubilee, celebrating 50 years of impact, innovation, and partnership. Cherishing our past, charting our future. Welcome to the heart of innovation, where the sand dunes of time meet the waves of progress. Welcome to Riyadh, the pulsating capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In the cradle of civilization, where dreams soar higher than the desert dunes, a beacon of hope rises. For 5 decades, the IsDB has been a catalyst for change, empowering nations and transforming lives. As we celebrate half a century of resilience, determination, and progress, join us for a monumental event under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Ministers, policymakers, industry leaders, and changemakers from 57 member countries and many partner organizations will converge to better shape the future of sustainable development. From 27th to 30th of April 2024, Riyadh will be the epicenter of global dialogue and collaboration. Join us as we continue this collective journey of collaboration, inspiration, and transformation. 2024 IsDB Group Annual Meetings and Golden Jubilee, celebrating 50 years of impact, innovation, and partnership. Cherishing our past, charting our future.
نحن نخدم الإنسانية.
Welcome to the heart of innovation, where the sand dunes of time meet the waves of progress. Welcome to Riyadh, the pulsating capital of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In the cradle of civilization, where dreams soar higher than the desert dunes, a beacon of hope rises. For 5 decades, the IsDB has been a catalyst for change, empowering nations and transforming lives. As we